Voltairine De Cleyre, 1866–1912, was an American anarchist, feminist writer and theorist active at the time of the Haymarket riot. She is the person who, in response to U.S. Senator Joseph R. Hawley's offer of $1,000 to have a shot at an anarchist, said, "You may, by merely paying your car fare to my home, shoot at me for nothing, but if payment of the $1,000 is a necessary part of your proposition, then when I have given you the shot, I will give the money to the propaganda of the idea of a free society in which there shall be neither assassins nor presidents, beggars nor senators." Direct action. By Voltairine De Cleyre. From the standpoint of one who thinks himself capable of discerning an undeviating route for human progress to pursue, if it is to be progress at all, who, having such a route on his mind's map, has endeavored to point it out to others, to make them see it as he sees it, who in so doing has chosen what appeared to him clear and simple expressions to convey his thoughts to others, to such a one it appears matter for regret and confusion of spirit that the phrase direct action has suddenly acquired in the general mind a circumscribed meaning, not at all implied in the words themselves, and certainly never attached to it by himself or his co-thinkers. However, this is one of the common jests which progress plays on those who think themselves able to set metes and bounds for it. Over and over again, names, phrases, mottos, watchwords, have been turned inside out, and upside down, and hindside before, and sideways, by occurrences out of the control of those who use the expressions in their proper sense, and still, those who sturdily held their ground, and insisted on being heard, have in the end found that the period of misunderstanding and prejudice has been but the prelude to wider inquiry and understanding. I rather think this will be the case with the present misconception of the term direct action, which through the misapprehension, or else the deliberate misrepresentation, of certain journalists in Los Angeles, at the time the McNamara's pleaded guilty, suddenly acquired in the popular mind the interpretation, forcible attacks on life and property. This was either very ignorant or very dishonest of the journalists, but it has had the effect of making a good many people curious to know all about direct action. As a matter of fact, those who are so lustily and so inordinately condemning it, will find on examination that they themselves have on many occasions practiced direct action, and will do so again. Every person who ever thought he had a right to assert, and went boldly and asserted it, himself, or jointly with others that shared his convictions, was a direct actionist. Some 30 years ago I recall that the Salvation Army was vigorously practicing direct action in the maintenance of the freedom of its members to speak, assemble, and pray. Over and over they were arrested, fined, and imprisoned, but they kept right on singing, praying, and marching, till they finally compelled their persecutors to let them alone. The industrial workers are now conducting the same fight, and have, in a number of cases, compelled the officials to let them alone by the same direct tactics. Every person who ever had a plan to do anything, and went and did it, or who laid his plan before others, and won their cooperation to do it with him, without going to external authorities to please do the thing for them, was a direct actionist. All cooperative experiments are essentially direct action. Every person who ever in his life had a difference with anyone to settle, and went straight to the other persons involved to settle it, either by a peaceable plan or otherwise, was a direct actionist. Examples of such action are strikes and boycotts. Many persons will recall the action of the housewives of New York who boycotted the butchers, and lowered the price of meat. At the present moment a butter boycott seems looming up, as a direct reply to the price makers for butter. These actions are generally not due to anyone's reasoning overmuch on the respective merits of directness or indirectness, but are the spontaneous retorts of those who feel oppressed by a situation. In other words, all people are, most of the time, believers in the principle of direct action, and practices of it. However, most people are also indirect or political actionists. And they are both these things at the same time, without making much of an analysis of either. There are only a limited number of persons who eschew political action under any and all circumstances, But there is nobody at all, who has ever been so impossible as to eschew direct action altogether. The majority of thinking people are really opportunist, leaning, some perhaps more to directness, some more to indirectness as a general thing, but ready to use either means when opportunity calls for it. That is to say, there are those who hold that balloting governors into power is essentially a wrong and foolish thing, but who nevertheless under stress of special circumstances, might consider it the wisest thing to do, to vote some individual into office at that particular time. Or there are those who believe that in general the wisest way for people to get what they want is by the indirect method of the voting into power someone who will make what they want legal, yet who all the same will occasionally under exceptional conditions advise a strike, and a strike, as I have said, is direct action. Or they may do as the Socialist Party agitators, who are mostly declaiming now against direct action, did last summer, when the police were holding up their meetings. They went in force to the meeting places, prepared to speak whether or no, and they made the police back down. And while that was not logical on their part, thus to oppose the legal executors of the majority's will, it was a fine, successful piece of direct action. Those who, by the essence of their belief, are committed to direct action only are, just who? Why, the non-resistants, precisely those who do not believe in violence at all. Now do not make the mistake of inferring that I say direct action means non-resistance, not by any means. Direct action may be the extreme of violence, or it may be as peaceful as the waters of the brook of Shiloh that go softly. What I say is, that the real non-resistants can believe in direct action only, never in political action. For the basis of all political action is coercion. Even when the state does good things, it finally rests on a club, a gun, or a prison, for its power to carry them through. Now every schoolchild in the United States has had the direct action of certain non-resistants brought to his notice by his school history. The case which everyone instantly recalls is that of the early Quakers who came to Massachusetts. The Puritans had accused the Quakers of troubling the world by preaching peace to it. They refused to pay church taxes. They refused to bear arms, they refused to swear allegiance to any government. In so doing they were direct actionists, what we may call negative direct actionists, so the Puritans, being political actionists, passed laws to keep them out, to deport, to fine, to imprison, to mutilate, and finally, to hang them. And the Quakers just kept on coming, which was positive direct action, and history records that after the hanging of 4 Quakers, and the flogging of Margaret Brewster at the cart's tail through the streets of Boston, the Puritans gave up trying to silence the new missionaries, that Quaker persistence and Quaker non-resistance had won the day. Another example of direct action in early colonial history, but this time by no means of the peaceable sort, was the affair known as Bacon's Rebellion. All our historians certainly defend the action of the rebels in that matter, for they were right. And yet it was a case of violent direct action against lawfully constituted authority. For the benefit of those who have forgotten the details, let me briefly remind them that the Virginia planters were in fear of a general attack by the Indians, with reason. Being political actionists, they asked, or Bacon as their leader asked, that the governor grant him a commission to raise volunteers in their own defense. The governor feared that such a company of armed men would be a threat to him. Also with reason. He refused the commission. Whereupon the planters resorted to direct action. They raised volunteers without the commission, and successfully fought off the Indians. Bacon was pronounced a traitor by the governor, but the people being with him, the governor was afraid to proceed against him. In the end, however, it came so far that the rebels burned Jamestown, and but for the untimely death of Bacon, much more might have been done. Of course the reaction was very dreadful, as it usually is where a rebellion collapses or is crushed. Yet even during the brief period of success, it had corrected a good many abuses. I am quite sure that the political action at all costs advocates of those times, after the reaction came back into power, must have said, "See to what evils direct action brings us. Behold, the progress of the colony has been set back 25 years. forgetting that if the colonists had not resorted to direct action, their scalps would have been taken by the Indians a year sooner, instead of a number of them being hanged by the governor a year later. In the period of agitation and excitement preceding the revolution, there were all sorts and kinds of direct action from the most peaceable to the most violent, and I believe that almost everybody who studies United States history finds the account of these performances the most interesting part of the story, the part which dents into the memory most easily. Among the peaceable moves made, were the non-importation agreements, the leagues for wearing homespun clothing and the committees of correspondence. As the inevitable growth of hostility progressed, violent direct action developed, for example, in the matter of destroying the revenue stamps, or the action concerning the tea ships, either by not permitting the tea to be landed, or by putting it in damp storage, or by throwing it into the harbor, as in Boston, or by compelling a tea ship owner to set fire to his own ship, as at Annapolis. These are all actions which our communist textbooks record, certainly not in a condemnatory way, not even in an apologetic way, though they are all cases of direct action against legally constituted authority and property rights. If I draw attention to them, and others of like nature, it is to prove to unreflecting repeaters of words that direct action has always been used, and has the historical sanction of the very people now reprobating it. George Washington is said to have been the leader of the Virginia Planters Non-Importation League. He would now be enjoined, probably by a court, from forming any such league, and if he persisted, he would be fined for contempt. When the great quarrel between the North and the South was waxing hot and hotter, it was again direct action which preceded and precipitated political action. And I may remark here that political action is never taken, nor even contemplated, until slumbering minds have first been aroused by direct acts of protest against existing conditions. The history of the anti-slavery movement and the Civil War is one of the greatest of paradoxes, although history is a chain of paradoxes. Politically speaking, it was the slave-holding states that stood for greater political freedom, for the autonomy of the single state against the interference of the United States. Politically speaking, it was the non-slave-holding states that stood for a strong centralized government, which, secessionists said and said truly, was bound progressively to develop into more and more tyrannical forms. Which happened. From the close of the Civil War on, there has been continual encroachment of the federal power upon what was formerly the concern of the states individually. The wage slavers, in their struggles of today, are continually thrown into conflict with that centralized power against which the slaveholder protested, with liberty on his lips by tyranny in his heart. Ethically speaking, it was the non-slave-holding states that in a general way stood for greater human liberty, while the secessionists stood for race slavery. In a general way only, that is, the majority of Northerners, not being accustomed to the actual presence of Negro slavery about them, thought it was probably a mistake. Yet they were in no great ferment of anxiety to have it abolished. The abolitionists only, and they were relatively few, were the genuine ethicals, to whom slavery itself, not secession or union, was the main question. In fact, so paramount was it with them, that a considerable number of them were themselves for the dissolution of the Union, advocating that the North take the initiative in the matter of dissolving, in order that the Northern people might shake off the blame of holding Negroes in chains. Of course, there were all sorts of people with all sorts of temperaments among those who advocated the abolition of slavery. There were Quakers like Whittier, indeed it was the peace at all costs Quakers who had advocated abolition even in early colonial days. There were moderate political actionists, who were for buying off the slaves, as the cheapest way. And there were extremely violent people, who believed and did all sorts of violent things. As to what the politicians did, it is one long record of how not to wit, a record of 30 years of compromising, and dickering, and trying to keep what was as it was, and to hand sops to both sides when new conditions demanded that something be done, or be pretended to be done. But the stars in their courses fought against Caesar. The system was breaking down from within, and the direct actionists from without as well were widening the cracks remorselessly. Among the various expressions of direct rebellion was the organization of the underground